Efendim Hülya Hanım'a teşekkür ediyoruz. Bizleri yeni bir marif şerhinden haberdar ettiği için hem de tebliğlerinde sundukları güzel tespitlerden ve son tespitinden dolayı özellikle bütün veliler Hazreti Peygamber ile aynı gerçeği dile getirmektedirler. Onun nurlu yolunun gönül sultanları demiştik. Muhterem dinleyiciler, biraz geç başladık oturumumuza. Dolayısıyla biraz geç bitecek. Burada oturum başkanı olarak adaleti sağlamak için Hülya Hanım 5 dakikadan feragat etmişti ama 20 dakika konuştular. Mahmut Hocam 25 dakika konuştular. Omid Safi Hocam ta Amerika'dan geldiler. Onun konuşma süresi de 25 dakika olacak inşallah. Amerika Birleşik Devletleri North Carolina Üniversitesi'nden, Chapel Hill'den geldiler. Orada dini etütler bölümünde hocalık yapıyorlar. Tebliğinin konusu sadece Veled. Mevlana'nın aşk şehrinin kapısı Sultan Veled. No one but Veled. Sultan Veled as the gate to Mevlana's city of love. Dear Dr. Safi, you have 25 minutes. Thank you very much.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much for the gift of time. You people of Konya, mashallah, are çok kerim. Let me begin by actually talking about something that I hadn't written down, but it's more important, which is, why are we here? Some of you are blessed to live in Konya, in the city of Hazreti Mevlana. Some of you have come from Istanbul. Some of us have come from halfway around the world. Some friends have come from Iran and many other countries. Why have we come? Jamal Nur Hoca, the friends from TÜRKKAD, all of the scholars, our Çelebi friends, have put so much work into this. But what is the reason? We haven't come here just to give academic papers. We haven't come here to find faults with each other's arguments. If there is some time, inshallah, in the next few days, we should walk down to Hazreti Mevlana Torbese, and there, next to Mevlana, next to his father, next to his son, you will see two signs. One of them will say, Qaddasallah sirruhu. May God sanctify his secret. May God sanctify his heart. And there's another one that says, Qaddasannallah bi asrarihi. May God sanctify us from his secret, from their secrets. This is why we're here. We have come in order to become insan. We have come not because we are already beautiful, but because we want to become beautiful. We want to find the meaning of what it is to live as an insan. This was true also in the time of Hazrat Mevlana. Muinuddin Parvaneh said, I love Mevlana, but his murids have such bad adab. Mevlana went to him and said, everything you say about them is true. They have terrible adab, bad adab, ugly adab. This is because if they were already beautiful, if their adab was already çok güzel, I would have become their murid. All we're asking is what Hazrat Mevlana says, Kham be magzar mara. Don't leave me raw. Don't leave me uncooked. May the nazar of the awliya, may the spiritual work make each of us a real human being, a real insan, which is as my friend Mahmoud was saying, it's not just a matter of genetics. The same Mevlana has Sultan Veled, who we come after 700 years to honor, and the same Mevlana has Alauddin, who goes a very different direction. The sons of Hazrat Nuh drown in the flood, but the dog of Ashab Kahf become the Awliya. Right? Maybe find the means of being beautiful human beings, inshallah. Let me come to the stories of Sultan Veled and say that, of course, there are many stories, some of which you have heard and some of which you will hear again, that talk about the closeness, the relationship between Mevlana and Sultan Veled. If you remember that not in today's world, but in the medieval world, whether you were speaking about kings or you were speaking about saints and about God, you didn't get to just walk in to the court of a king. There were chamberlains to keep people out. And you didn't just get to walk in to the Dargah Ilahi, to the realm of the divine. You had to have permission and you have to have intercession. It's actually for that reason that it's so remarkable when a king would show himself directly to the people. And it's for that reason that the namaz, the salat, is really a revolutionary religious idea. That every woman, every child, every man can go directly to Allah, not going through indirect means. But in that society which required intermediaries and gates, Mahmoud has already reminded us, أَنَا مَدِينَةُ الْعِلْمُ عَلِيٌّ بَابَهَا is what Hazrat Payghambar says. I am the city of knowledge, and Ali is the gate. We could almost say that Mevlana is Madinatul Ishq. He is the city of love, and Sultan Veled is the gate to that city of love. I want to demonstrate this by talking about 3 or 4 stories and open up these stories, if we're given permission, to talk about some of their inner meanings. We have heard about the traditions when Sultan Veled says of his relationship with his father, أَنْتَ أَشْبَهُ النَّاسِ بِي خُلْقًا وَخَلْقًا. Right? You, of all people, are the one who's most similar to me in your nature and in your manners. And of course, this does bring to mind so many of the Ahl Bayti tradition that we have heard. But how does this work? How does this work? If we begin reading the story of Sultan Veled, we come across some stories that at first seem strange, seem hard to believe. One story is that Sultan Veled would always go to sleep in the arm of Hazrat Mevlana. And when Mevlana would want to get up for his namaz, Sultan Veled would start crying. And nothing would calm him down. And then Aflaki says that Hazrat Mevlana put his own breast into the mouth of Sultan Veled, and by the grace of God, milk would come out and calm down this baby, exactly as a spring of water, clean water, would come from the finger of Rasulullah. Now, this is a strange story. Many scholars, when they hear this story today, they say, this must be nonsense. This is superstition, right? What man can have milk coming from his breast like a woman? I would suggest that we should not be reading these stories as stories of târihî, as stories of history. Rather, these are the stories of tazkirah. These are the lives of the awliya that always have a deeper meaning. So what is this deeper meaning? Tazkirah comes from the root of zakara, which is to remember. We are remembering the ones who remember Allah. And these stories work through humor, through anecdotes, through paradox. Sultan Veled himself says, Tifle Adami Zade, the child of a human, doesn't become a bird and it doesn't become a donkey. A child of a human is designed to become a human. چون شیر مادر را می‌خورد به مقام پدر و مادر می‌رسد. When he or she drinks the milk of the mother or the father, they reach the maqam, the station of the mother, of the father. The truth is not about whether milk can come out of the breast of a man, but rather whether ishq, whether love can come from the heart of a human. To understand this story, you have to go back to the foundations of tasawwuf, to some of the stories of Attar, that when he's talking about mantiq al-tayr, he tells us another story of a woman that sees her son, her child, her daughter fall into the river, and she dives into the river and saves her child. The child is crying, and she takes her breast and puts it in the mouth of the baby to calm the baby down. And then Attar switches, and he says, I'm not talking about a mother, I am talking about Rasulullah. شیر ده ما را ز پستان کرم یا رسول الله. O Messenger of God, nurse me, feed me from your breast of generosity. So we have to know these contexts, that for the Mevlevis, Hazrat Mevlana is, as they said, farzand jan Muhammad ast. He is the offspring of the soul of Muhammad. And just as Attar was asking the Prophet to nurse us, to suckle us from the breast of compassion, to save us from sin, Mawlana is nursing Sultan Veled so that Sultan Veled becomes a real insan, inshallah, a real sheikh, a real teacher. We see the same kinds of stories later on in the story that was alluded to this morning. Sultan Veled begged and pleaded with Mawlana to be allowed to enter khalwat, a retreat. Mawlana initially said no. He said, for those of us who are Muhammadi, and I'd like to say not just Muslim, Muhammadi, those that have internalized the quality of being Muhammadi, there's no need for going into a spiritual retreat. However, Sultan Veled insisted. And so Mawlana said, okay, yes, you may have a chille. When Sultan Veled comes out of the chille, his face was illuminated with light. And Mawlana said, tell us about what it is that you saw. And he says, Sultan Veled says, I saw lights as majestic as tall mountains. And I heard the voice of God telling me, Inna Allaha yaghfiru dhunub jami'a. God forgives all the sins, all of them. Mawlana says, Bahauddin, it's exactly as you saw. It's exactly as you say. It's 100,000 times as you say. However, because of obedience and respect for the one that brought us the divine guidance, Hazrat Payghambar, don't speak of this with people. This is because most of them have not yet reached the rank of being a real insan. They are in reality still donkeys. And if you tell this to them, they're going to mess up society and they're going to turn away from God. You hear these kinds of stories and you remember earlier stories of tasawwuf. You hear and you remember the story of Abul Hasan Kharaqani that Attar tells us about. When he says one night in prayer, he heard a voice from God saying to him, Abul Hasan, do you want me to tell people what I know about you? Do you want me to tell them all of your faults, all of your shortcomings? Abul Hasan says right back to God, do you want me to tell them just how merciful you are and how loving, so that none of them will prostrate themselves in namaz? And God says to Abul Hasan, Nazman va nazto. If you won't tell them, I won't tell them. Right? It's these teachings of the awliya that serve as reminders of, yes, the need for namaz, the need for shariat, the need for structure, but to always remember that God's mercy comes before, comes after, and envelops it all. So we do not fall into the trap of worshiping the form when we should be here for the ruh, for the spirit. It's because Sultan Veled sat with Mevlana for 50 years. It's because he was the son, because he was there in those intimate situations, that he gets to ask Mevlana the secret of what had just taken place. Because he asks, we hear. This is true spiritually. It is also true at the level of literature and stories. Most of you are more familiar than I am. I wouldn't need to repeat this, but it's such a beautiful story that it's nice to repeat it again. You know the story of the Christian monk who had come from Istanbul to Konya because he had heard the stories of Hazrat Mevlana. He had become that lover who had fallen in love without ever having seen the Mashuq, the beloved. He comes to Mevlana, and when he sees him, out of respect for Mevlana, he bows down like this. He raises his head to begin speaking, and he sees that Mevlana is still bowing down to him, so he goes back down. The Christian monk says, 33 times I lifted up my head, and 33 times I saw that he, Mevlana, was still bowing down to me. At this time, he rents his cloak and says, why are you showing such respect towards me, a wretched infidel? And Mevlana says, this is the teaching of our Sultan. And by Sultan, of course, he means Hazrat Peygamber. He says, our Sultan says, blessed is the person who is humble in his honor. You are a servant of God. Why would I not show this respect to you? Now, if the story ended there, we would just see a monk bowing down 33 times. Alhamdulillah, the story doesn't end there. Mevlana goes home and speaks with Sultan Veled. Because Veled asks and because Mevlana answers, we are taken inside the sir, inside the secret. Mevlana says, Bahauddin, Sultan Veled, Alhamdulillah, because of the success that comes from the Ahad, from the one true God, and because of the aid that comes from Hazrat Peygamber, Ahadi wa Ahmadi, we were able to not overcome the monk, but to overcome my nafs, overcome my ego. This is because humbling yourself, lowering your nafs, this is the true inheritance of the treasure of Muhammadi. Truth be told, if Sultan Veled was not there as a gate towards Mevlana, we wouldn't be gathering. We are gathering because through him we are learning about the traditions, of Mevlana. We know that at one point, Moinuddin Parvaneh had invited Sultan Veled to give a talk, and he begins by getting on the minbar, on the pulpit, and begins by simply acknowledging his father, Mevlana. He says, Shaykhi wa imami wa qiblati wa quvvati wa sayyidi وسندي مولاي ومأوائي ووالدي جلال الحق والدين. He says, I have been informed by my sheikh and my imam, my qibla and my strength, my source of strength, the sultan of those who attain to reality and to the faith, Jalal al-Haqq wa-d-Din. He doesn't say another word, and he gets down without offering a khutbah, without offering a sermon. Parvaneh goes to him and says, even though Hazrat Mevlana Baha Veled, Sultan Veled, didn't give a khutbah today, it is enough of a karamat, it's enough of a miracle that he is the beloved child of Mevlana. It is enough that he is the beloved child of Mevlana. And Sultan Veled's service to Mevlana continues until the very last breath that Mevlana takes. Just as when Hazrat Payghambar takes his last breath, he is in the arm of his Ahl Bayt. When Mevlana takes his last breath, he is being held by Sultan Veled. That famous last ghazal, Ro sar beneh bebalin, go to bed and sleep, leave me alone, let me wander in the night. Right? That poem is the poem of Mevlana for Sultan Veled. It is the parting word of that father to that son. And what a father and what a son. With those words, Mevlana left Veled and he went back to Shams and the Lord of Shams. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Let me end, and since I've spoken about humility, it would be silly for me to not at least try to pretend and to practice it, so I will end early. Let me end by saying 2 points that it seems to me useful to take away from, and I was inspired by what Mahmoud Hoja said about the world in which we live and being aware of the connection between these teachings and our world. The first one is about the Masnavi. Most of us who are here love the Masnavi. We hope that in some small way our lives have been touched, have been shaped, have been transformed by the Masnavi. In the Veledname, Sultan Veled writes about why he had to write his book. He says, Mal asaf, most people of the day are rather stupid. They love the story of the Masnavi, but when they read it, they think that it's talking about the king and the maiden and the lion and the parrot and the merchant. They see them as characters outside. They don't realize that the king is you, the maiden is you, the lion is you, the merchant is you. It is all you, it is all inside you. In other words, rather than simply reading the Masnavi, we have to become the Masnavi. We have to begin at the beginning, talking about the separation, crying out, shikayat, of feeling separated from Allah. And if the tawfiq comes, if the aid of Allah comes in the guidance of real murshids, then we can end up at the end of the first book, at the maqam of Imam Ali, at the station of the perfect, mature human being, inshallah. And this is the last thing that I will say. Sultan Veled talks about the fact that the sirr, the secret of Hazrat Mevlana is very much like the secret of Islam. He cites the hadith of Hazrat Payghambar that Islam began as a stranger and it will someday return as a stranger. The implication is that Mevlana too started out as a stranger and will someday become strange. Alhamdulillah, not in Konya, not in Istanbul, but in many places around the world, when I look at the understandings of Islam that I see. And as Mahmoud Bey said, perhaps it's better adab not to name it. I see a strange kind of Islam. I see an Islam that's lacking in ishq, lacking in love, lacking in rahmat, in mercy, lacking in aql, lacking in an understanding of our history, lacking in an awareness of who we are, lacking in justice, lacking a heart and soul, and ultimately lacking the barakah of Hazrat Payghambar. Occasionally, not in Konya and not in Istanbul, but in other places, when I look at the connection that people have to Mevlana, I see a strange kind of Mevlana. It's a Mevlana without the Quran, without the Hadith, without Hazrat Payghambar, even at times without God, without ritual, without community, without order, without training. May it be that, inshallah, through the help of God and the assistance of the Prophet and the guidance of the real murshids, that we can come to a real understanding of Islam, a real understanding of tasawwuf and of Mevlana, and return to that blessed Muhammadi path of returning to the embrace of the Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyid al-Mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Ashkulsan.